Hey, Fred. Thanks for that long and thorough and really interesting response about consciousness. Um, you say you're on board with the idea that consciousness is decomposable into modules, and that it can sort of be reduced or broken up into different faculties, and would be better understood that way than conceiving of consciousness as some kind of a unity. Um, the example that I was using was Rudolf Steiner's threefold understanding of the soul, as he calls it, which I think, in the context of consciousness studies, would be very close to what people like David Chalmers, for example, mean by consciousness. Um, and Fred, you said that this is a fine sort of folk psychological way of dividing consciousness up into some more manageable series of concepts or modules or functions. Um, and it struck me that maybe consciousness is kind of a game changer in the way that science can't treat it in the way that it might treat other phenomena. Um, and that the very dichotomy between scientific knowledge and the sort of folk common sense understanding doesn't really hold for consciousness, because the consciousness itself, the very phenomena um, of consciousness, like thinking, feeling, and willing that we're trying to understand, they exist in everyday life, and so the common person's understanding of what consciousness is all about should be just as valid, or in fact is really the source of all valid facts, of all valid experience concerning consciousness. Um, it's I think it's wrong to suspect that there should be some um, expert knowledge, or some secret knowledge that an elite class of neuroscientists or psychiatrists or whatever have that uh, your normal everyday person lacks an understanding of. I think somehow, to understand consciousness, we're going to have to move past that sort of a dichotomy, which may be necessary to hold to in other fields, but when it comes to consciousness, maybe we have to call it into question. Uh, and really, what's interesting about consciousness is its unity, after all, right? And so, while I do think it's helpful to understand it in terms of these other functions, to really give an adequate account of what consciousness is, we have to account for its unity, for our sense of enduring identity, and the coherency of our perception of the surrounding world. The way that our senses usually, when everything works correctly, are synthesized into a gestalt world. We don't really experience our senses as separate senses. We experience them, you know, most commonly, when everything's working right, as a whole. We experience a world, um, not visual phenomena and auditory phenomena, but they sort of generally, along with proprioception and um, you know all of our bodily perceptions, they just mesh together into an overall picture um, of the life world. So I don't think we should go too far with this idea that consciousness is best studied in a modular sort of way. Um, you didn't like the idea that I thought consciousness was atomic, um, but let's explore this a little bit more, because I'm not really saying that consciousness is somehow um, in atoms, or proto consciousness, or experience um, the sense that, like, a Whiteheadian like David Ray Griffin would say, pan experientialism. Um, I'm not saying that the experience is in the atom. The experience is something that would emerge um, in relationship, the relationship between the atoms, and so it includes space, and consciousness is what happens in the dynamic, which includes atoms in space seeking one another out. Um, the consciousness isn't simply located anywhere. It's more of an emergent property of systems of atoms, just like in human beings, consciousness is an emergent property of groups and societies and cultures, um, which is, even if you are a physicalist, to say consciousness is in the brain neglects the way in which our consciousness is shaped by all sorts of external artifacts, language, the alphabet, chief among them, but also other people's faces, and intersubjectivity is, I think, constitutive of what we mean by, our own sense of awareness and enduring identity. So, consciousness is relational and not atomic in the sense in which I think you took me as saying. Um, Now, this idea that mind has always been in the universe is is not the same as saying um, that matter has always been in the universe, because mind isn't without matter. So when I say mind has always been here, um, I don't mean mind contrary to matter. I mean that in some sense the universe is organismic. Um, it shows the characteristics of growth and development, and it's highly ordered. And these are noetic qualities, mind-like qualities. And so when I say that, I just mean that as Plato put it, the universe is a living thing, and um, it's participating in uh, you know higher forms of order that we couldn't explain, I don't think, in a mechanistic or random within a mechanistic or random framework. Um, this metaphor of mechanism, you were unhappy with, and I think I would. I think it's kind of a cliche at this point, so I can see why you'd be frustrated by my using it. Um, but there is an important difference between a machine and an organism, and it's basically this. It concerns their form, um, the form and purpose of their organization. The Chilean biologist Humberto Maturana and Francisco Varela coined this term autopoiesis to um, describe the essential characteristic of life, the paradigm case being the single cell. And that word is autopoiesis, um, which just means self-production. And the difference between a self-producing organism and a machine is that a machine is other-producing, which is to say that it takes in some sort of raw material, transforms it into something else. Um, it produces something other than itself, whereas an organism produces itself. And this sort of self-organizing quality is, I think, true of the universe as a whole. Whereas machines are always built uh, piece by piece by some sort of an intelligent designer. I don't think the universe is built by an intelligent designer. It isn't pre-planned in that sense. It's rather an organic process of growth. It can still be mind-like and not be designed. If we just conceive of mind in a more living and vital way, rather than in the sort of architectural way that it often is. Um, yeah, I guess that's enough for now. I think I hit all of your main points, Fred. But I'm gonna do more thinking on this. It's fascinating to get to talk to someone of your intellectual caliber about this, because it's presents me with an opportunity to learn about my own thoughts on the matter, and I appreciate the added uh, capacity for reflection that these conversations um, present me with. Because like I said, if consciousness is intersubjective or primarily constituted by intersubjective relationships, then it's precisely in conversation that we would learn what consciousness is, right? So yeah, thanks, Fred. Take it easy.